Welcome to It Takes a Village podcast. I am Jenny Schultz-Thomas, host and creator of It Takes a Village, and so excited to finally be launching episode 1 of It Takes a Village. And this is Sarah Rensel-Jones, who will be a regular contributor on It Takes a Village. Thank you for being here, Sarah. What do you think?
I love the idea that we are going to be in a village together here at the church and in village houses and getting a chance to know each other better through all that we do in those conversations and having something to unite us.
Oh, awesome. You know, we have been talking about launching a small group program here at Countryside. And it's one thing to kind of plan and organize and think deeply about how we would like to be together, but then knowing what to study or, you know, what's the heart of this program going to be. As soon as I found this book, David Brooks, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others and Being Deeply Seen, it sort of hooked me. I mean, this is sort of the heart of where we are in this country, right? So distanced and needing to truly give ourselves to relationships, to connection and belonging. So here we are. I think this, once you open this book, it will hook you too. It's sort of the Jerry Maguire line, you know, you had me at hello. So David Brooks, you had me at step 1. I'd like to read an opening paragraph that he shares on page 7 and then into page 8. A great quote. I learned something profound along the way. Being open-hearted is a prerequisite for being a full, kind, and wise human being, but it is not enough. People need social skills. We talk about the importance of relationships, community, friendship, social connection, but these words are too abstract. The real act of, say, building a friendship or creating a community involves performing a series of small, concrete social actions well. Disagreeing without poisoning the relationship, revealing vulnerability at the appropriate pace, being a good listener, knowing how to end a conversation gracefully, knowing how to ask for and offer forgiveness, knowing how to let someone down without breaking their heart, knowing how to sit with someone who's suffering, knowing how to host a gathering where everyone feels embraced, knowing how to see things from another's point of view. Gosh, I feel like it would be a utopia, right, if we were living exactly like this. Nobody is getting it exactly right all the time, but he really speaks to this nature of giving ourselves over to the betterment, not only of ourselves, but of the other person that we are in relationship with. I feel like, of course, the ultimate optimist here, that if we only, right, chose to live this way, we really could make a huge impact on not only society at large, but the relationships that we are involved with. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's a huge component of how we interact with each other. And the word that I kept thinking of is noticing. I was looking, you know, and I kind of wish I could Google the book and see, like, does he use the word noticing? Because I don't recall it, but I was thinking about at the top of page 12, he says, I'm beginning to see you. You know, being able to say that to people. I'm beginning to see you. Certainly, I will never fully experience the world as you experience it, but I'm beginning a bit to see the world through your eyes. And I think we have to notice each other and be able to be willing enough to come out of our own shells, to kind of observe if another person maybe looks concerned or are confused. I think especially at church, we have that opportunity to practice this as we see each other, whether it's in passing and worship or in different times. But we have to notice. We have to be able to look up from ourselves. And I think of this James Taylor song that says, "Look up from your life." Like, you have to look up from your life to engage with other people and notice them.
That's so powerful. I remember reading another book, another New York Times bestseller called On Looking. And it was through a scientific lens, but this parent was talking about walking through New York City, right, in the sidewalks, and their child looking at all the dirt and bugs within the cracks between the sidewalk. And the intentionality with which I think children, and maybe this intrinsic kind of component that we have, to look and to notice. And then where is that loss, right? So not only noticing our surroundings, but noticing who it is that we're engaging with and the particularities of that person and their interests. There's a point at which Brooks speaks about noticing his wife, right, standing in the doorway. And it's this wonderful, paragraph or two. And we won't go into that today, but I think it's a great opportunity to really think about the people that we already do know and love, and we think we know intricately, right, and intimately. What is it particularly that we see and notice, and saying those things, right? Because it's one thing to be appreciative or to have, a family member or a child or your spouse, and to kind of take for granted those amazing things about the people that we love. Imagine if we picked out something about a stranger or someone in our small group or someone walking and sitting on the pew beside us at church and really saying something, thank you so much for the way that you were kindly greeting me today, or just making sure that when we notice, we actually take action, right, to say, or a gesture of kindness. I think that's what Brooks is getting at in this chapter, which is really so uplifting.
Yeah, and I think we have to be able to be of service to others in a way, right? To be able to come out of ourselves and do that, and know that we might encounter people anew in any moment, right? Like, I think of family too. It's like, I have 3 teenagers now in the house, and so I just assume that in the morning they're going to be grumpy. Right. But it's like, what if one morning they're not, and one of them has a need and actually wants attention and wants me to be available? If I just go with the assumption that they're in a bad mood every morning,
right,
then I can miss an opportunity to connect. And certainly, I do that very imperfectly because I do assume. But, noticing, like, today it might be different.
That's right. I mean, noticing it's listening too, right? This whole listening to not the story that we already presume about someone or the world, which is the stereotypical place that we find ourselves, right? In this polarized community where at large, I think we notice the things that we want to, right? And maybe we dismiss the things that take a little bit more work for us to see. Right? It takes more work to say, okay, grumpy teenager, mom is available, because then your time is theirs, right? So noticing takes intentional work and commitment in the relationship. One of the ways that Brooks describes this in the book is through this concept of illumination. And I love this. At first it just reminded me of this kind of good versus evil, right? If you're a diminisher or you're an illuminator, right? You're on one side or the other. And I think we know that there are two sides of the same coin, right? That sometimes we illumine, right? We put someone else in the light. We put all of our attention and focus on them and illumine them, right? And support them. And other times we're the grumpy ones, right? And we can be diminishers as well. But the way that he juxtaposes, I think, the opportunity to see, to listen, is through art. He said the art of seeing, right? And it takes practical effort, right, to illumine someone, to shine your light on them. And he has such a gracious way of talking about this in the book. He talks about, even if you think the idea of God is completely absurd, right? Can you just give yourselves over to believing that each person has a soul, right? And if so, that every single person that you encounter, you will see some spark within them, some beautiful, amazing spark within them. And, reading that, I thought about every time you go through a drive-through, especially traveling, like if you're going on a trip, and we just drove across multiple states in July, lots of fast food drive-throughs. And, there's this opportunity to notice, to see, and to illumine someone who's probably been diminished a lot throughout the day by someone who just says, give me my fries, or drives off. But it's these small gestures that really do allow us to be transformative for a moment, to illumine and to say, thank you so much, how's your day? I mean, you can do that in a way that's really genuine, and you can also just make sure that you're doing it even when you don't feel like it, right? So I love the way that he talks about illumination as something that is accessible to all of us, and it can be transformative. What did you think about that whole illumination diminisher chapter?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. And I love the example. I'm looking over your shoulder and seeing you have it kind of lit up too. On page 14, he's talking about this engineer, Harry Nyquist, and that all of these folks at Bell Labs had lunch with him and then came up with these amazing projects and really were able to develop the interests that they had and the ideas. And he was like the link between the productivity that they all had because they were having lunch with him and he was asking them questions and being really curious and engaged. And none of it was for his own glory, right? Like he was, whether he was trying it or not, or he could have just genuinely been interested to know, but
Right.
he was able to bring things out for them, and allow them to go back to their work and really dig in and have that inspiration and encouragement. And I just thought that was really so cool. And that's really kind of along the lines of what you're saying. It doesn't have to be a huge effort all the time, right? It can happen like in small doses, in little increments, but really be powerful when someone is curious about you, and really wants to hear like, oh, this happened to you? Like, what was that like for you? You know, I've been into that question lately. I heard it with someone on Instagram asking people, what was that like for you? And it's vulnerable. You know,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I was thinking about is the vulnerability. In my chaplain work, sometimes, you know, I encounter people and I could imagine saying, you know, what was it like for you? And someone saying, like, what do you think it was like?
Oh, for
right?
sure.
And having to be kind of ready to say, well, honestly, I don't know. And that's why I'm asking, because I can imagine, but I'd love to hear from you. But also knowing that there's a risk there, that they might shut me down. And, you know, how I'll just have to take care of myself from that, but
Yeah.
being willing to take the risk.
I know. I mean, taking a risk, I think that speaks really profoundly to the nature of trauma in relationships, right? Because so many, I mean, even just reading this laundry list of amazing things that, you know, Brooks lays out, if we can learn to do one or two of these things well, we will be so much better off, right? But learning to trust and being able to trust someone denotes a certain willingness to take that risk, right? And if you've had past trauma in relationships, that you're risking, right, being shut down, you're risking being hurt again. And I think the real difficulty is that we're really rehearsed at hurting each other. We know really well how to create an environment that's safe for only one kind of person, right? And we center our own egos and our own experiences. And I think the real opportunity, right, and I think the reason I was so drawn to this work, and not because David Brooks is some miracle, you know, he's the white male, you know, writer, right? The one that sometimes that we're criticizing all the time, right? Because of the patriarchal position in the world. But he's named all of that, right? And has offered up a work based on so much research, right? And listening to and interviewing some of the most amazing voices out there. But even then, right? This is an opportunity for any single individual, right? To access a deep need and a deep understanding and a willingness to take a risk in spite of, right, the harm that has been happening, whether we've offered harm or we've been harmed ourselves. I think knowing that in vulnerability, right, we talk about this all the time, right, and our faith teaches us too, in vulnerability, we are made stronger because we are open, right? Be open is the sermon I'm preaching this Sunday. We are open to healing when we are willing to take the first step, right? And I think what's really hard is people take those steps all the time, and then the doors are slammed in their faces, or, right, there's harm. But I think when we work as a community, right, we have 130 some people participating in It Takes a Village, right? And the village at Countryside, reading together this, that's a huge commitment from this community, saying that we value one another, we value connection and belonging, and we want to make sure that Countryside, that this community, is a place that you can take that risk and be met with grace, be met with love, right? And then we're going to try to see each other and try to lift up the parts where maybe others have been harmed, and now this is a place for healing, right? So I think it's such a beautiful opportunity, but there's always risk involved in growth.
Yeah, and I love the idea that we can practice together, you know, whether it's in these small groups that we form in the village houses, or if it's in the larger community here at Countryside. We can come back together to sort of reflect on, like, here's how I try to put this in practice in my daily life, and maybe here's what happened. And so if something went sideways and we were uncomfortable or our feelings got hurt, we might have people that we can reflect with, and then we can go out and try again, right? Because it is something, you know, I think that that's part of what our faith encourages us to do when we say, like, we want to put love in action, or be bold in terms of, not that we're converting others, like, that's not what we're about, but putting our love into our footsteps and being willing to try again, even if there have been times when we've been rebuffed, knowing that it's what we're called to. It's not just about like how we feel. That's important, right? And we have to process it. But it's also like, okay, well, I got shut down that one time, and I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again next hour, worst case next day, next week, whatever it may be. And I'm part of this community that has my back, and I can come back to them and talk about it and know that I'm loved, right? That's not in question. So then I can go from there and take risks, sort of like kids, right? Like they attach to us, and then they can go out and explore, and they know, like, I'm going to come back to home base and find mom again.
I love that practice and, practicing. I love that David Brooks's approach is about refining his own skill set, his own commitment. He said I don't know if this was in the book or just an interview, but he said, one of his goals in life was to be someone that people could confide in. And he said he just hadn't had that in the last few decades, but he noticed, and these people who were so impactful with others, they were people that others would confide in, right? But it took a lot of practice, intentionality for him to see himself, notice himself, and mirror himself, and practice. Practice these social skills, practice seeing someone instead of yourself first, practice listening first, practice all of these things that we know are refining skills for us. I think at the heart of practice, though, is intentionality and a longing, right? Do people want this? I think that's a real question, right? That is really hard. One of my favorite economists, actually, Daniel Kahneman from Princeton, he talks about rationality. And I remember thinking and being disheartened at some point about different political things going on in our country. And I heard an interview on NPR with Daniel Kahneman. And, he said, you just have to remember that people are not rational, right? We are not always rational. And most of the time we're not. We are emotional humans. We are full of all the most beautiful and amazing things. And those things are our relational commitments. And our emotions are the gravitas of our emotions sometimes outweigh some of the things that we think or we would know better and do something if we were just rational humans. And so I think when it comes to how we form ourselves in community, we have to understand that rationality and a commitment to the greater good, right, takes practice, right? It takes practice to say, well, my emotion is this, but I know the right thing is that. I'm thinking about my son, Sage. He's 11, and he just started swimming like on 3 nights a week at Brownell's Habit with a friend. And he just started, and he said, I don't like it. He was swimming, and it was hard work. It was an hour and 15 minutes, his very first practice. And he looks over at me, and I'm like I'm waving at him, and he's like, I don't like it. And so after, he said, I don't really want to do it. It's not fun. And I said, you know what? Some things are not really fun, but they're really good for us. And we talked about this discipline and the practice and the endorphins and the things that he would get from swimming. And he loves swimming. It wasn't he doesn't love swimming. He doesn't love the intentional practice and commitment, the discipline part, but he wants to be the best swimmer. He wants the outcome and the goal, right? But the hard work. And I think that's our own lives, right? We have to practice being better humans. We have to practice loving others and serving others before our own selves. And, Brooks does say, people really do want this. I think that's important. He says, it's not that people don't want these things. Above almost any other need, human beings long to have another person look into their face with loving respect and acceptance. He says it's that we lack practical knowledge about how to give each other the kind of rich attention we desire. And then he names a whole lot of reasons why. He finally says the key to it all is to make others feel deeply seen. So powerful.
Yeah, it's so huge. I remember, it makes me laugh because one time someone asked me about my favorite movie, and I'm not a huge movie buff, so I didn't really have one. But what I've often thought is one of my favorite movie lines is actually from Runaway Bride.
Oh my gosh, that's such a fun movie
though. But there's this part where the Richard Gere character goes back to his apartment in New York City, and he brings the Julia Roberts character with him So spoiler alert if you haven't seen it.
Runaway Bride, throwback,
They do hang out together.
1990.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen it by now, you're on your own. But he's sitting at the piano with his ex-wife, Rita Wilson, and he says something like, was the problem that I just didn't see you? And she looks right at him and she says, no, you didn't. And I just, even now, like, gives me chills still. I know it's like, it could be silly.
Oh my gosh.
But it really feels like that. It's like the crux of the issue is, as we look at each other, are we deeply seeing each other, or are we seeing our projection onto the other people? Like, we can't help it. That's something that happens. But I really love what David Brooks says about it being a skill, you know, and as we talk about practice, think about being a skill. It's not that you either have it or you don't.
Right.
You can learn.
You can learn.
And so that's huge, because that's hopeful. And that, you know, to kind of go along with the point about kind of our divides in our country, it means that we have the ability to make adjustments to that. Like, we
Yes.
can change. We can practice seeing each other, and, you know, we don't have to be only a diminisher or an illuminator.
Right.
Like, that's not an innate inborn quality.
Right.
We can notice that we're actually kind of acting like a diminisher and practice being an illuminator instead.
That's so true. I think that's a great place, you know, to kind of end on. If you haven't read this book, you have no idea who David Brooks is or how to know a person, there's always hope when we give ourselves to the work. I think one of the questions is, right? I mean, we are in this very polarized nation, you know, and world, right? At any given time, we could sit for hours and hours and just debate one issue, right? Where someone has othered the other person, and then talk about what if they sat across and they truly saw one another, right? There would be some movement towards health, wellness, growth, and life. I mean, just recently the happiness, you know, report came out that the UN sponsors, and I think Finland is at the top, like for the 17th time in a row. But it's really interesting to think about the reasons, right, that those Norwegian countries are always in the top 6 out of 10, right, for years and years. It's not just because they walk around smiling all the time. In fact, they're always shocked that they're up there because they're not always smiling and hugging all the time. But they have this deep shared commitment to the wellness of the other, right? And so it matters more that they are all happy and have the things that they need. And that's the basis of why they are giving these responses in these interviews, right? It's not just me, myself, and I. Even if we're isolated and feeling apart from a community, that can really sort of taint the view that we have on someone else. So I think doing this work together is essential, right? Practicing alone, you know, you can look in the mirror and have these conversations with yourself all day long. But if you don't come and sit with someone, break bread, right? Say the wrong thing and then have someone say a gracious response, right? That's the refining piece of the work. So friends, thank you for joining us on It Takes a Village. This has been so fun. Thank you for being a part of this wider community. We hope that you will join a Village House if you have not. Pick up this book, and if we can learn together and grow together, if we can continue to build the village that we all need, we will be one step closer to a community that really sees one another. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. This was awesome.